Welcome to Ask Leo Answercast number 141. I'm Leo Notenboom, and I'll be answering questions that people are asking out at AskLeo.com. Today's Answercast is brought to you by AskLeoBooks.com. In the coming weeks, you're going to hear me talking about more of my plans for publishing more books and getting them out to you more quickly in the coming year. AskLeoBooks.com is where you'll find all of my currently published books and discounts and information and much, much more. Have a look at AskLeoBooks.com. Leo, I recently purchased an Asus VivaTab tablet running full Windows 8.1, not Windows RT. And I've tried just about everything to connect to my Windows XP SP3 to the tablet. Both computers are set to use the same workgroup name, namely MS Home, but the tablet asks for a password when I'm setting up the home network. To my knowledge, Windows XP does not issue network passwords. Can you help? Well, it doesn't issue network passwords, but in a sense, it kind of does. Networking is indeed kind of hard. This is something that can be kind of tricky to get set up and get working. And yes, to be clear, it's way trickier than it needs to be, and I've written a couple of articles basically just venting about that in the past. But ultimately, it is what it is. The good news, I think, here is that we can get it to work. It works for me is one of the obvious things I can say. I have a plethora of different versions of Windows, and they're all talking to each other without too much of a hiccup. Now, indeed, I do have kind of my own little magic formula to make that happen. So what I'm going to do is walk you through exactly what it is I do when I set up a Windows machine that I intend to have connect to and share with my other Windows machines. And to be clear, I want to start out for people that are not necessarily coming in with exactly the same question. We're talking about file sharing here. What that means is that on one computer, you are sharing out a folder, and on some other machine, you are attempting to connect to that folder so that you can access the files within it or place files within it, whatever. These techniques also happen to make remote desktop just a little bit easier as well, since the same issues tend to get involved. But this is mostly about connecting to file shares on one machine from another when the versions of Windows that are involved on those two different machines are themselves different. So I'll start with one, and that is make sure they're on the same network. Now, I know that this is obvious, but it actually needs to be said. When you have more than one router in your system, it is very possible for you to actually have more than one network without really realizing it. The problem, of course, is that routers' jobs, one of the router's jobs, is to protect what's on one side of the router from what's on the other side of the router. I refer to this all the time as the router acting as a firewall when it protects you from what's coming in on the internet. If you have a couple of different routers, then it's very possible you have two different networks, one of which is being protected from the other, and that means, of course, that you won't be able to do file sharing across the router. What you need to make sure of is that those two machines that you're attempting to do this with are in fact on the same network, which typically implies the same side of your router. Make sure that they're in the same work group. Now, you've done this already with MS Home. I personally tend to use a different work group name. I set something up that's a little different. And I do that because it's not the default. That then ends up acting as kind of a small barrier. I mean, it's not a huge amount of security, but it's a small barrier if I have guests coming into my home and happening to use my network while I'm around. Then it's not nearly as easy for them to maybe go spelunking around on my network and see what they can find or connect to other shares on my machines. Now, this is where things get interesting. Step 3, use the same login name on both machines. So what I do on my machines, on every Windows machine I have, is I create the exact same login name on each of those machines. And when I use my machines, I log into the same account name on each of those machines. That gets important because step number 4, use the same password for that account on all of your machines. I set up that same login account on all of these machines with the same password. And this little item is one of those easy to overlook things. I know that when we talk about websites, we definitely talk about using different passwords everywhere, even if you're using the same login name. In the home, if you've got a bunch of machines sitting there and they're all in your control and you're relatively certain that nobody's going to walk up and start using them, or you've got some level of physical security associated with them, even if it's just the fact that you know who's in your home, having the same login name and password does make a number of things easier, this being one of them. Now, number 5, again, this also tends to be counterintuitive to some security practices, and I absolutely get that. But the accounts that I've created on all of my machines, they're administrator accounts. They all have administrative privileges. Like I said, I know limited user account is the thing to do if you have concerns about the user of your machine not necessarily knowing what's safe and not to install, or to prevent malware of various forms. I get that. I really do. But it's one of those things that actually does make life a little bit easier at the cost of just a little bit of a security risk, depending on how you use your machine and your own level of expertise. And, to come down to it, all of these things that I've mentioned so far, they are actually all little tiny security issues, right? Using the same username on all of your different machines, using the same password on all of your different machines. That's why I say, you're assuming a different kind of security in some ways, or that the issues that might be caused by this are going to be relatively small. So when you now connect from machine A to machine B needs to authenticate you somehow. It needs to confirm that you indeed have permission to connect to the share that you're trying to connect to. How Windows does that is another one of those incredibly complex things. Even the people that understand networking deeply can get easily confused by all of the different options and all of the different techniques and all of the different things that happen when those things don't work. Like I said, it can be really complex. But one way that makes life easier is that it will appear to use your current login credentials on machine A as one of the things that it will test to see if you have permission on machine B. So if those same credentials exist on machine B, they just get easier, which is why I have the same credentials everywhere. It's my username, it's my password, and they're all administrator on all of these different machines. Now, I have to throw out another one of these big fat caveats here at the end. There are no guarantees that this is going to work. Like I said, it works for me, and it works really well for me, and when it comes to Windows machines talking, what I've outlined here works for me. Networking, as I've said, is incredibly complex, and it's certainly possible that random things can affect it. But, like I said, and like you often hear technicians say, this works for me. I have one MS-DOS program that is invaluable to me. However, it won't run on my Windows 7 OS. Can I install Windows 98 on an external drive that I then use for backup and run the DOS program on this drive? If not, could I move the backups off of the external drive and install Windows 98 on that drive and then run the DOS program? Well, the short answer is you're not going to get the scenario that you've described working, in that you're going to have to actually reboot into Windows 98. Now, you can do that off of an external drive if you've got Windows 98 installed on that drive and the program on that drive and so forth. I don't think you even have to move your backups for it. But before you go down that road, I want you to investigate a different solution that is a solution I use, in fact I rely on, that I think will make your life a whole lot easier. This is a job for a virtual machine. Now, people often consider when installing Windows 98 or some other older operating system that they still need on a second drive. Like I said, it can be an external drive or it can be an internal drive. It could be a USB flash drive or a USB external drive or whatever. They then have that set up in some kind of a dual boot situation so that when you boot your machine, you choose which operating system you want to boot into. To me, that's just too much hassle. It really is. Half the time I've been in those kind of situations, there's something I'm doing on this operating system that, darn it, I wish I had the other one up too. There's a solution for that. Virtual machines are basically software that emulates a machine within your machine. It's really hard to describe the technology, so instead, I'll describe the results because that's actually a little bit easier. Here's the scenario after everything is set up. You have one operating system that you would boot your machine into. That's probably Windows 7 in your case. After that's up and running, you would run a program called a Virtual Machine Manager. In that program, you will double-click on a virtual machine representation that has been configured to run Windows 98. Now, here's the key part. A new window then pops up that looks and acts as if it were its own separate computer, completely. It's a virtual computer, a virtual machine. Within that window, you'll probably see a virtual BIOS run for a couple of seconds, which then loads Windows 98, exactly as if it were a machine running Windows 98. After a few seconds, in fact, you are running Windows 98 in a window within Windows 7. Then, of course, you can fire off whatever old program it is you need to run in Windows 98. Virtual machines can be moved, they can be cloned, they can be copied very easily. The tricky part, of course, is getting one set up. You would, of course, need your Windows 98 installation media because, to start all this, you'll be setting up Windows 98 from scratch, just like you did 15 or however many years ago Windows 98 was current. This time you'll be doing it within that virtual machine window. Now, I use VirtualBox by Oracle. In fact, like I said earlier, I rely heavily on it. It's how I run Windows XP on my Mac. It's how I run XP and Vista and 7 and 8, all on my Windows 8.1 desktop machine. Hi, Leo. I have an email request form on my website, and every now and then I will get a blank form sent to me, or maybe with a few URLs for medications of various sorts in it. I'm also getting returned email and out-of-office messages. I can see that they've been sent from bogus names at my domain. How do I fix this? The bogus email addresses on your domain are easy, and I'll point you at a previous article of mine. I keep getting bounce emails for addresses on my domain that don't exist. How can I stop this? The bottom line is that simply having a domain will cause this to happen. And the only solution that I know of is to only pay attention to the email that is actually sent to valid email addresses on your domain. Ignore all those others. The form submission issue is an interesting one and not something I've talked about before, but it's something that I actually deal with every day. In a word, the problem here is spam. It's a form of spam known as web spam, and every contact, comment, or information submission form on every website has to deal with it or will deal with it at some point soon. And yes, as a website owner, it's something you're going to deal with as well. Web spammers are looking to do either of two different things. They're either going to try and use your form to send email spam, or they're trying to use your form to post spammy information on your website. Many web forms, any form where you might enter some information and press a submit button, work by collecting that information, then emailing it to someone. Here at Ask Leo, for example, when you enter your question, that's actually emailed off to an email address that then records it appropriately and inserts it into my question handling database and automatically emails you a quick response to let you know that I got your question. Since email is the backbone of so many web forms, spammers try to do two different things. One, they actually try to hack the technology so that they can directly send email messages, i.e. spam, using some unanticipated vulnerability in the form handler on your site. Or, two, they try to hack the form so that when the form sends its message, that message is actually sent elsewhere, and the contents of the form contain the things that you saw. Spammy messages, or medication URLs, or who knows what else. Spammers will probe every web form they find on the internet to see whether it can be abused. Those probes often look like blank messages, or they may even have a few URLs in them. The other thing that spammers care about a lot these days are comment forms. The goal is to place links on your site that go to their sites in order to either entice your visitors to go there or, more commonly, to make it seem to Google and other search engines that their site is much more important or authoritative than it really is because it has all of these links coming to it from all over the internet. Unfortunately, there's no real standard for what a comment form looks like. So, spammers will treat just about any form as if it were a comment form and just post their links and whatnot and submit the form. Solutions are actually limited, but they boil down to these two most common approaches. The first, and you've seen this I'm sure, are CAPTCHAs. This is why you see those squiggly characters on so many submission forms. Computers can't figure those out yet, so automated tools that are used to post spam to web forms can't get past this step. In addition, there are things like math equations or picture matching forms or other forms of CAPTCHA as well. The other approach are spam filters. If your website uses WordPress, as mine does, then you have available to you something called Akismet. It's a spam filter for web forms. After a web form is accepted, but before the email is sent, Akismet judges whether or not its contents are spam. If the message is determined to be spam, it's filtered out and the mail is never sent. So, it all comes back to spam, spammers, and the constant battle of wits in technology. Leo, I've followed your advice and have been doing system backups with Mac Reflect in Windows XP. My current 8-year-old Dell desktop computer is showing signs of failing and I will probably have to replace it soon, maybe concurrently with the April loss of support for Windows XP. Can the XP backup be used on a Windows 8 computer? Well, first of all, good on you for backing up. Like I've told many people, that puts you ahead of something like 90% of the people out there. So that's fantastic. I love to see that. People are using backup tools and backing up regularly. Now, the question of whether you can use your Windows XP backup on Windows 8, I want to be clear, Mac Reflect works on Windows 8. I think it may very well be the same version, or you may need to pick up the 64-bit version if the new machine turns out to be running 64-bit Windows. But yes, Mac Reflect will work. I think what you're really asking is, will the backups you've taken under Windows XP be useful as you transition to your new machine? The answer here is yes and no, but mostly no. What I think you're asking is probably mostly no. Image backups cannot typically be used to transfer an installed operating system from one machine to another. That's not what backups are for. The problem is that the image contains Windows and its drivers and its settings that are all specifically configured for the machine that you're backing up. The chances are that those drivers and those settings are just all wrong for your new hardware. Now, there are some programs and utilities that will attempt to basically fix that by locating updated drivers during the restore. I believe one of Macarium's backup products actually already includes this as part of the package. But further complicating this is that with your specific scenario, it's possible, I'll even say likely, that there aren't all of the Windows XP drivers you might need for the new hardware you might purchase today. And I have to stress again, this isn't what backups are for. Backups are not for moving complete installations from one machine to another, especially when those other machines are different. So, yeah, then what good is a backup, right? What is a backup for? They're for restoring a complete installation back onto the same machine. When your hard drive fails, which happens much more often than people realize. When malware attacks so badly that starting over is the right way to clean them up. Image backups are perfect for those kind of scenarios, and you'll be really, really glad that you had them if and when you encounter those kind of scenarios. Now, having said that you can't use your backup to transfer your Windows XP to your new hardware, I will say that the backup itself could still be useful with your new machine. After you've set up Windows, probably Windows 8, after you've installed all of the software that you're going to use on your new machine, then your backup can actually be a convenient place from which to get your data files. Now, we often really just transfer data files manually some other way. We'll copy off all of the data files, all of our documents, all of our whatevers to like an external drive or to USB drive, and then we'll recopy them onto the new machine, whatever machine we're working to. And that's fine. That works great. Even then, and particularly then, when you think you've got everything copied over, your image backup of that old machine can be a great way to recover the files that you forgot to copy in the first place. For about a month, on both my Acer and HP, both about 3-year-old, laptops with Windows 7 Premium, my boot would fail about 1 or 2 times a week, sending me through the Windows repair process. I tried a number of things to no avail. Then about a month ago, I found and used a boot defragmenter tool on the Advanced Tools section of Glare Utilities. I like and have used Glare Utilities software for several years, but I've never defragged my boot before. For the last month, I've not had a single boot problem on either of my laptops. Could just using the single Glare Utilities boot defrag tool have totally fixed my boot problems? Yeah, it's possible. My suspicion is that it didn't really, quote-unquote, fix anything. I think it just moved things around, which is ultimately what defrags do after all. I think you might still have an issue that might be waiting to bite you later in a different way. Now, I'll admit that this scenario is a little out there since this happened on both of your machines, but I'm still going to run with it because I think it is something that at least makes me uncomfortable. I believe that you may have a bad sector on your hard drive. It's not so bad as to fail every time, but either it's marginally bad or it's going bad, so that, right now at least, it fails sometimes. I also believe that some files required during boot time were actually using that sector, that marginally bad sector. Until, that is, those files were defragged. Defragging simply moves files, or rather portions of files, around on your hard drive so that they are physically close to one another. It's just a speed optimization. It doesn't change the file's contents in any way. It just, like I said, moves them around. So it's quite possible that some file was in fact using that marginal sector, and the process of being defragged, it no longer does. Here's why I think you still have a problem. That sector, that marginally bad sector, it's still out there. Maybe it's now in use by a file that's never used. Maybe it's free and it's available to be used. In which case, it could bite you later when perhaps an important file tries to use that sector and your marginal sector turns out to be a sector that was going bad, and it finally does go bad completely at a really inopportune time. What I would do in your shoes is start with a check disk /R on that drive. That'll perform a surface test. Hopefully, it'll find that sector and either fix it or remove it from any possibility of future use. Hi Leo, I find many websites offer great free things to try, but when I attempt to download the software, I'm told that I can only download it if I have a Facebook account. Occasionally, I'm also restricted to downloading only if I have a Google account. In my mind, free should mean free, not free only if I use Facebook/Google. Since I refuse to use Facebook or Google, this doesn't seem quite fair to me. I'm sure there must be others that feel this way too. I sense that this is a money issue and that Facebook and Google are paying these websites to restrict their free usage only to customers that agree to Facebook and Google's rules. Is this becoming more common, and do you think it's a fair practice? First, I think it's pretty clear that websites can do whatever the heck they want to, really. I mean, within legal limits, of course. Seriously, that's how a free market works. If you don't like the requirements that are placed on getting something, then don't get that something. If enough people agree with you, then that site will not get whatever it was they were hoping to get by giving away whatever it was they were giving away. Is it fair? Gosh, that's an unanswerable question. I really don't know. Life isn't fair. In particular, when it comes to the internet, I guess I just don't look for fair. If it's really a no-strings-attached kind of giveaway, fantastic. But if it isn't, when I encounter these kinds of things, I make a decision and I get on with my life. Like I said, that puts you in control. To be honest, free is rarely free. There's an economics principle I learned years ago when I was required to take, I think it was Econ 102 or something like that. TANSTAAFL. It's an acronym. TANSTAAFL. It's an important one to remember. TANSTAAFL. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. Sometimes you have to give up an email address. Sometimes you have to have a Facebook account. Sometimes you have to look at ads. Sometimes there are other things from completely benign to truly annoying. Bottom line, if you don't like it, leave. I do not believe that Facebook or Google is paying anyone to force their services to be used. I've certainly never seen or heard of such a thing. Typically, website owners that have a giveaway like this will use Facebook or Google, potentially even requiring Facebook or Google, for one of two reasons. One, it's an easy way for the person offering free things to stay in touch with you. It doesn't require them to set up any complicated registration. Second, it's an easy way for them to encourage you to share whatever it is they have to offer on one of those social media sites. That's it. I mean, that's really all that I think is at play here. It's a business decision. Whether it's a good business decision or a bad one, well, that's a different discussion. Personally, I probably would go the other way, but I could see arguments for it being the right one as well. It depends on what they're trying to accomplish with their giveaway. But don't think for a second that there isn't some kind of business rationale behind what it is they're attempting to do. I don't know if it's fair. I don't really know what fair means in a context like this. But ultimately, no, it doesn't bother me. If the requirements are too high to get something for free, well, then I don't get it because it's not really free. I just move on with my life. And that's another week's worth. I do the Ask Leo Answercast every week. So if you have a question about your computer, the internet, technology, head on out to AskLeo.com and search for your answer or ask your question. You might hear it answered here in a future Answercast. I also put out a newsletter every week. The Ask Leo newsletter includes answers and fixes and safety tips and opinions and even the occasional answers to just why things are as goofy as they are. Please back up. I plug this every week because it's so important. And when I mentioned books earlier in the podcast, it's one of those things you're going to see more books on exactly how to back up and why. Nothing can save you from almost any disaster like a proper and recent backup. Please be aware, all of my answers are based on my own personal experience and they should be used entirely at your own risk. Back up first. I don't know you, your abilities, or the specifics of your machine, and those kinds of details can make all the difference in the world. The Ask Leo Answercast is a production of Ask Leo and is copyright 2014. Thanks again for listening. I'm Leo Notenboom, and I'll be back soon with another Ask Leo Answercast.